Our third presenter will be Seth Burgess, who is a transportation supervising engineer in the Bureau of Engineering and Construction at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Seth will also provide some insight into the impact on DOT bridge inspections and bridge preservation at Connecticut DOT.
Good afternoon. My name is Seth Burgess, representing the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And as noted, I'll be giving a brief presentation about Connecticut Department of Transportation and how COVID's impacted some of our operations and how we've adjusted throughout. But first off, I'd like to say, thank you to everybody here. If it wasn't for our DOTs, our consultants, our contractors, and our vendors within the construction industry, those with the critical responsibilities would not have been able to provide services necessary throughout this past year. Most of the people on the call were somehow involved with keeping our operations moving and providing innovative techniques to mitigate the situations that we've encountered over the past 6 to 8 months. And just as mentioned, I'd like to say thank you to you all. We all deserve an infinite amount of high fives, and we'll have to continue the air fives for the next couple months, and maybe body bumps will continue at some point in time. All right, so I'll start with initial impact. Hopefully you guys see this slide. Week of 3/16, we were all working normally. We were asked to work remotely if possible. It was a quick changeover that we tried to implement as soon as possible, and there was a lot of learning curves involved. The goal was to reduce the close interactions between the employees, especially in the office settings. On 3/18, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act was signed into law, which provided employees paid sick leave under specific circumstances, and that's continued to be evaluated today. When we became remote, it was important to update all of our employees' contact information based on their new work locations. Each employee had to provide information on where they'd be working and what they would be doing to enable supervisors to appropriately track, their staff. One thing that we were able to do is implement wide-scale use of Office 365. That has been a major platform for us to do our remote work and gain access to a lot of the information we used to utilize through our networks. It provided the access to these documents and files necessary to continue each employee's work, and that continues to evolve, especially when it comes to storage and document upkeep, as most employees may not be tied to the network like they used to be. We've limited all office access to authorized personnel only. And initially, in the first couple months, DOT categorized their employees based on the essential needs to determine which employees were required to be on site and which ones could work remotely. DOT has allowed flexible hours and telecommuting based on each employee's child or elder care through this, especially with a lot of school systems conducting school from home and the distance learning. It makes it more difficult for employees. So that continues to be an adjustment for both supervisors and staff. One important thing is communication, and it's been requiring more daily attendance and upkeeps and record keeping for our direct supervisors. The day-to-day communication face-to-face and knowing what employees are doing is basically gone for most departments, and that communication to the supervisor is crucial. In regards to some ongoing adjustments, throughout the entire time since the beginning of March, we've received weekly updates from our Governor and Commissioner's office on the state's status and what our department's doing and required to do. And as of 10/14, the Governor signed the 75th executive order since the emergency declaration was put in place back in March. As the other presenters noted, I think everybody is following similar protocol, that we have increased cleanliness and PPE. It's required that we clean and provide frequent cleaning of common touch points throughout our office settings or any situation that you may come in contact with other employees. To do so, we try to implement more use of soap and potable water, hand sanitizer with alcohol, disinfectant wipes and spray, paper towels and tissues, nitrile gloves, safety glasses or goggles if necessary. And face masks. Face masks are a requirement by our state in any public place. Another continued effort is to eliminate paper copies when possible. The DOT is allowing digital signatures and revamping our protocols and procedures to allow more and more use of that depending on the situation. We continue to practice social distancing guidelines to limit our exposure from one another if possible. And as months have gone on, there's been more and more interaction between employees, but trying to limit the direct exposure is crucial. The state has restricted unnecessary travel and requires self-quarantine and testing based on Connecticut travel advisory requirements. And communication, as I noted, is always a concern. It's a learning curve for those that were working a certain way for many years, and it's going to have to be something that's constantly evaluated. I want to touch base. I used to work for our bridge maintenance department that oversees our bridge preservation program. And I currently work for our construction department. I took the opportunity just before COVID kicked in and stirred up the pot. Our construction projects have evaluated their limitations operations based on each project's site conditions and adjust work hours based on the lower traffic volumes that we saw, especially in months, March, April, and May. June, there was an uptick. July, there's been more on the roads, but it's allowed us to have some potential cost savings and expedite production for the 2020 season. Finances, currently the department has no major impact computed. We think it's going to be an ongoing evaluation and impact to our budget over time, but considering it's so new and still in the midst of dealing with it, there hasn't been any major financial impact. There has been some minor increased costs for additional PPE for each employee. There's been additional vehicle usage and fuel for those vehicles. And then the state continues to try to purchase equipment to help employees work remotely, including tablets and screens and headsets and monitors, as I mentioned, with screens. And that's going to be an ongoing additional cost to get those employees set up. Currently, there's no definitive plan to return to the office setting until at least after the new year, but operations will continue. There has been conversations of our office setting come mid-spring, returning maybe at a reduced staff level. And we're hoping to be back up and running at least by summer of next year, but I think the next couple months is going to be a tell-all, and we'll just continue to adjust as needed. As mentioned before, those employees are to return. We have to find ways to mitigate their exposure and make the office setting safer and reduce interaction between employees physically, and also supply adequate cubicle spacing for those employees working in the office. The Connecticut Department of Transportation has noted an increased production on the project delivery side of our projects. We've seen some increased production and efficiency, and we hope that shows throughout in other units, and over time we'll be able to tell more about how it's impacted our state. Next slide, I will be getting into more of our bridge maintenance operations. As I mentioned, our bridge maintenance department oversees most of our bridge preservation program, and to do so we utilize maintainers from our garages spread across the state. These maintenance garages back in March, they had a little different scenario because they're not as technologically advanced. They don't have the access to a lot of the computers and technology that the engineering side and the construction side do. They had to reduce their physical staff to week on, week off, basically 50% on one week, 50% the other 50% the following week. And all employees remained on call depending on the need, especially to alleviate safety hazards. This allowed the state to potentially quarantine employees if there was cases found. I specifically am not aware of any, but if it was to occur, half of the staff could be quarantined and reduce exposure to the others. Meetings were moved outside or in garage bays or more of an open environment when possible to enhance social distancing, and that's continued to be conducted. I think over time they've been able to get more access to Office 365 and conduct Teams meetings. Teams has been a major platform for us when it comes to communication between employees and departments. And maintenance had to make some major adjustments to their operations based on critical needs, especially in the initial months before they returned to full staff. As I noted, they were brought to full staff about back in July, early to mid-July, the transition of getting the maintainers back to their garages. There was a big push around that time. But in regards to our preservation inspectors, that program continued throughout. It did not skip a beat. We had reduced risk for those inspectors based on their interaction with crews. They were able to basically keep distance from the contractors that conduct our work. And we didn't skip a beat. The work continued, the projects have continued, and hopefully keeping our bridges in a state of good repair. In regards to our bridge safety department, state employees were made to telework on planned office days as well, when they had to come in and review reports, compile reports, process reports. They were allowed to telework as well, which required time to set up that teleworking. Over the first month, they had some struggles to set up staff with RDP connections because they needed access to the network, Office 365, Teams, etc. They had to provide training, had the learning curves, they had equipment issues, even for some employees, just general access to the internet from their house was difficult. Luckily for bridge safety, they had a plan in the works to get tablets around mid-July and August. And due to this, that drastically improved their productivity because those tablets were necessary and they're hard to come by, especially nowadays. The field operations for bridge inspection continued as social distancing could be practiced both on the state side and our consultant side. One way that was done was in the vehicles. We only allowed one employee per vehicle traveling to and from the project sites. This required spare vehicles to be put in use that weren't typically in use. We had to reevaluate our assets and bring some things out to assist those employees that needed to travel. We assigned vehicles based on each unit's needs. There was a reevaluation of who needed what, and the critical ones were provided first. In addition, there was some use of personal vehicles to and from the job site that was required. In regards to our state equipment, our bridge safety unit has their own bucket trucks for state forces, and those only have one-man buckets anyway. But the consultants were always advised to practice mitigation measures if they were to work in a bucket with another employee, as obviously you're in close quarters. As I noted, the major things of impact were additional equipment for bridge safety for social distancing needs, and still no major direct financial burden. The wheel keeps turning, and bridge safety is able to continue their operations as well. So luckily on our construction, bridge maintenance, and bridge safety side of things, we've also continued to move along, and there's been some learning curves, but it hasn't impacted overall production. So to wrap up my presentation, I'd like to say real quick, just thank you all again. I appreciate your efforts. This is a very difficult time for all of us, and a lot to learn from one another, and hopefully we can continue in the right direction, and maybe this is a more efficient way for us to work nowadays. I'd like to say thank you once again.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.